Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. Carolynne, I know you just joined, so we haven't gotten to chat a lot. I can't tell you how excited I am about this topic today. Now, I know it takes a lot to get me excited. I'm a, it's
A lot.
I'm a pretty excitable individual for sure. But today especially is very meaningful to me. This particular topic, which I'm excited to jump into. So like I said, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll have plenty of people jump in. We had close to 200 registrants for today's webinar, which is great. So obviously a topic many are interested in. Beside myself with excitement to have Carolynne with us today, I have found Carolynne to exemplify the line that many of you who are attending live, many of you that may be listening to the recording, many of you find in your job titles, which is that line, all other duties as necessary at the very end. If you pay attention in our firm, you'll learn very quickly that Carolynne is consistently going above and beyond for clients, coworkers. She finds value, finds ways to add value at every turn. And truly, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone more authentic, anyone more sharp, more perceptive. And because of that, I feel like tends to have a good idea of the best decision on any topic that we're talking about or any issue at times. Yet somehow you would typically find a leader such as this to operate in black and white when they are picking up on everything that's going on. But Carolynne truly embodies this idea of operating in the gray. And it's to the benefit of garnering excellence in all decisions, reaching a decision that no one person may have known coming into the room. So, with that said, there may not be any person better to chat with on this particular topic, of course, which is on thinking gray. So, Sophie, if you would, Sophie's already done it. There's not surprising at all. The field note of this that we're going to be chatting about is in the chat box now. If you're not a subscriber to Field Notes, you're not one of the nearly 100,000 Field Note subscribers now in over 180 different countries around the world. We would love for you to get those pieces, those nuggets of leadership wisdom each and every day. So Carolynne, welcome back. In a second, I'm going to get you to tell us what are you currently loving about what you get to do every day. So I'll let you gather your thoughts on that. While I do that, would love to hear from everyone else. We'll utilize the chat box and the Q&A throughout our time for those attending live, questions, comments. But I'd love to know in the chat box who you are on the call today, and maybe where do you lean? Do you lean more black and white, as my wife does, who is just a fabulous attorney here in Nashville? Or do you lean more gray like I do at times? And I may talk a little bit about that perhaps as we go through. So as you drop that in the chat box, Carolynne, what are you loving about what you get to do every day right now?
Oh my goodness, Wes. First of all, you make me very uncomfortable. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Um, to answer your question directly, I am just coming off of 3 weeks of this pretty large scale culture transformation at one of our clients. And I get to work with the leadership team to really articulate the culture they're trying to create and then design experiences for their team members and their leaders to experience that and feel it and then decide if they're interested in getting on board with it. And so we just had a really great event yesterday where we were orienting 150 culture ambassadors for this organization, and to feel the energy from this group of people who really want to create an environment that is what they would consider to be a best place to work for their organization was inspiring for me. It was inspiring for me to see how we got the right people. So we asked for nominations for this program, and it was clear we got the right people. There was a lot of people who would be in your tribe, Wes, just enthusiastic and inspired and wanting to do great work. And so yeah, it's when you're a little travel weary coming off an experience like that, it makes it worthwhile.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I love what some folks are already dropping in the chat box there as far as where they lean. We've got some gray thinkers. Alec from Seattle even said light gray, gray, dark gray. That reminded me of the Lego movie. If anyone's ever seen that, Will Arnett, who plays Batman, and he says, I only work in black and sometimes very, very, very dark gray, which is a hilarious statement. So, but like I said, I'm personally excited for this topic, mainly because, like I said, more than one of my wife and I's intense moments of fellowship. I think I've mentioned before, we don't have arguments in my household. We only have intense moments of fellowship. And these opportunities that we have for deepening of our relationship in these intense moments of fellowship have often stemmed from her natural leaning toward right and wrong. She grew up, her dad was an attorney, she is an attorney, and I have a tendency growing up that we lean very middle ground in a lot of ways too. And so um, that obviously carries over into our workspaces, but our social lives too. So, Carolyn, could you just frame this up a little bit? Because in some ways, this idea and this concept is counterintuitive in the workplace as leaders. So just kind of frame this up and give us a general idea of why is this topic important as leaders?
Yeah, thanks, Wes. I think the fundamental challenge that we have is that many times in the workplace, we confuse sort of strength of leadership with decisiveness. And really, decisiveness meaning speed of decision making. I think that's where a lot of us get tangled up is like, well, I need to know the right answer and I need to be able to say it quickly and articulate it quickly. And if I can't, it makes me look weak.
Mhm.
And I think that's like been ingrained in us from movies and all sorts of, and maybe leadership books where somebody was like, we, did this and we did it fast and, had to make the decision in the moment. Sully Sullivan, how did you decide that you were going to land in the Hudson River? And it was like, well, I had to make this decision. And, so we've sort of had this romantic view of leadership and being decisive and speed and fast decision making when we don't always have to do that. We don't always have to be that fast with our decisions. So when I think about thinking gray and why some people don't necessarily consider it and think we sort of reinforce this black and whiteness because they think they need to be fast with their decisions. And the interesting thing about that too is like if you ask three questions, that doesn't mean you're slow. It doesn't mean that you're indecisive. It just means that you're trying to be in full possession of the facts before you make a decision. So it's an interesting. I don't think it's a dilemma. We often will divide the world into problems you can solve and dilemmas that you need to manage. And I don't think this is a dilemma. I think it's a problem that you can solve for yourself by getting clear in what are the things that I need to decide quickly, because it's either A, it's not that the consequences of it aren't that great, or B, I'm going to win or lose depending on the speed of my decision. Like I think we need to be really clear on when those moments happen, and then be clear about how do you think through things when that's not the case. So like, do you want pepperoni or mushrooms? Like not a complicated decision. I don't need to think in the gray for that. I actually want both. So can I have both? Thanks. Or if I don't act today, I'm going to lose that house, or I'm going to, not get the leverage on this deal. Like those are the things where you could win or lose based on that. But most other things, like they don't have to be that fast. So again, I'm kind of shifting the frame a little bit from black and white and gray to fast or slow.
hmm Yeah, I think that's very helpful as far as a frame. And that's probably where, like you said, a lot of leaders get hung up in some ways. So we've already got some folks in the chat box that have said we got some folks that do lean black and white, and then we've got others who are mentioning they lean more gray, but actually trying to get more black and white. And some saying I lean more black and white, and I'm starting to see the benefit of gray as well. How have you seen this play out with any of our client relationships or even maybe within our firm? Because we've obviously got a good, diverse variety of personalities, people that love a good Excel spreadsheet, and then we've got others who might thrive off of a more of a blank canvas where anything can happen. Uh,
Mhm.
how do you navigate this as it relates to people trying to lean one way or the other? How do you know where you need to land?
Well, I think that again, if it's not something that is clearly a black and white, like you have two options and you have to make one or pick one, or something that where you're going to lose leverage. I think most things should be in the gray. I think
Mm,
most things should like do require us to ask some questions, to really deliberate, and despite the fact that there are times when I just want to make a decision. I remember very clearly one decision related, and not to get into all of our inside baseball, but it was related to how we were going to support our managing directors administratively. And we had an old way of doing it that some of us had gotten tired of, and we were talking about introducing a new way of doing it. And some people wanted to keep the old, and I definitely wanted to go to the new. And somebody said, and so as a partner in the firm, I was having a conversation with some of the other partners about it, and we were all aligned. And somebody said, "Should we ask the other managing directors?" And I immediately said no, because I didn't want them to undo the decision, which they did. And then we ended up a year later going back and making the other decision later on. And so I think I definitely have a tendency, like if I've made up my mind, I just want to go. But that's not always the right leadership decision, right?
right.
So I do think that most things should be in the gray. I do think we have as a firm, I think a really strong track record of gathering input and making sure that we're not missing somebody's point of view, right? That's really what this is about. In some cases, it's how can we make a quality decision that is informed by the right people, that is aligned with our values, and that we have thought through the second order consequences of, which I think is really important when you're making decisions, right? Have you thought through kind of what the other consequences of your decision are? And so we always are trying to figure out, like, how do we make sure we have everyone the right points of view incorporated? How do we make sure it's aligned with our values, which, for us, it's all about relationships and excellence and, a handful of other things, long-term view, and then how do we make sure that we've thought through those second order consequences? So I think it's really we're really good at that. We've gotten better at it over time as we've researched more leaders and learned what they do best. We've incorporated that into our work. But I got to tell you, Wes, there's no one better at thinking through second order consequences than our founder. Like he is programmed and trained to do that. So anything that comes before him, he's like 14 steps down the road already, thinking through how can I, how can we make sure that these consequences of this decision are not going to undo something really important. So those are some of the ways that we think through things that I think are useful.
Yeah, that's really good. And you're right. Our founder does it where we're trying to come up with second and third order consequences. He's on number 12 and 13 down the
It's like,
road. It
and he does
is.
it so fast. Like,
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I think that's what all of us should be doing, right? I do think thinking in the gray and making quality decisions, again, kind of reframing this about speed and about how do we get to a quality decision. I think knowing your values is really important. I
Mhm.
think being very clear on both as a leader and as in your organization, how do we make sure that this decision is aligned to our values? I don't know that many leaders are as clear on that as they should be.
Mhm.
And I think the second order consequences are super important. I think the other thing that's important is, and this is something that's important for your teams too, is starting to get good at what's a decision we need to make as soon as possible versus what's a decision that we can make actually as late as possible.
Mhm.
We want to maintain our options and make sure that we have the ability to gather as many facts as possible so that we make a quality decision later. Well, sometimes we think this, I have to decide this today because somebody's asking me to, when in reality, you don't. And helping your team understand the difference and how you think about what decisions that you can make later is really important, because teams sometimes get really frustrated with leaders. They'll come to them and say, hey, we need a decision on this. And the leader, maybe there's some dead air there and they don't necessarily like think through all of the, or they don't communicate, I'm actually going to wait on this. And
Hmm.
teams get really frustrated and they're like, they just won't make a decision about this. And it's like, no, it's because they want to make sure they're in full possession of the facts, and they know they don't have to make the decision right now, and they're trying to keep their options open. And so, but they need to do a better job of communicating that. So I think introducing that, we use it as ASAP versus ALAP, as you know, and introducing that concept and helping kind of model to your team, like, these are the decisions I know I need to make fast, and or I can, and these are the ones that I need to maintain optionality for, I think is an important framework to introduce as well.
And fill out that acronym ALAP for all of our
So yeah,
listeners.
ASAP is, as everyone knows, as soon as possible, and ALAP is as late as possible.
Mm. And fill that out a little bit, because that's something that when we talk to clients, and especially senior leaders, in regards to trying to make a decision as late as possible, we get a lot of pushback on that. That is absolutely counterintuitive to what the world typically has for leaders.
Mhm.
Everything is typically ASAP. So could you fill out the benefit of that a little bit more? Because I do think, as we look at timing in all of this as a good frame for this, I think a little bit more detail on making decisions ALAP is a good piece, a good practical piece for everyone.
Yeah, so some context that maybe we carry with this is, we think that quality decisions often come down to, have you gotten the right people to weigh in on it?
Hmm.
So that's one element. Another element is this idea of optionality and making sure that you're maintaining your optionality for the certain decisions as long as possible. So, for more critical or complex maybe decisions, we encourage you to really like gather input from a number of people who have either knowledge about the decision, or they have context, or just a different point of view than you. And so making decisions as late as possible gives you the time and the space to be able to get that weigh in, as we call it, from those different groups. And I keep saying this word optionality. I think the other piece of this is options will reveal themselves over time often. And if you're trying to be fast and you're trying to be decisive, sometimes you won't see all of those options. And so knowing that something actually doesn't need to be decided today, we've got 2 months before we need to, gives you the opportunity to be able to see those options ahead of you. So, I mean, I think it's just, again, this idea that like we need to be fast and decisive is just wrong-headed sometimes, and
Hmm.
we've been programmed to want to do that when in reality we don't need to.
So the pushback we get on this, and you've mentioned some keys to this, I believe already, but what do you say to the leader who says, "I do not have time to think in the gray. I don't have time for that." Well, I know there's probably some context that we'd need to build to that, but what would your initial gut reaction be?
Well, so here's the thing. There's this great book called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. So if you haven't read it, you should pick it up. There's a chapter that we often will send to clients ahead of events that we're running, or just when we want them to be thinking about this. So in the chapter is called Thinking Gray and Free.
Mhm.
And very early in this chapter, the author points out the fact that if you are too black and white in your decisions, or if you're binary, is what he talks about. If you're binary in your decision making, there are dangers in that. One danger is that you're going to miss facts, right? Another danger is that you'll flip flop on a decision. So you'll make a decision quickly and then go back and undo it later, maybe because you missed some of the facts or for some other reasons. And the third danger is that you ignore your own judgment, you ignore your gut, and end up going with what you think the wisdom of the group is, even if that's going to be wrong. And so when people say I don't have time to think in the gray, my reaction is you don't have time not to, because you're going to end
Mhm.
up like going back. The potential for you to have to go back on a decision you made is pretty high. And so you're going to end up, like, I am a big believer in spending a bit more time on the front end, so that because otherwise what you end up doing is spending more time on the back end on doing a decision if you don't really spend that time up front thinking it through and gathering different perspectives, which if you're an Alex subscriber, if you use Alex or you have, one of the great things that we've trained Alex to do is take perspective. So you can go into Alex and say, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Now, like, help me take perspective and help me like incorporate other people's perspective or other perspectives on this situation. I think that's time well spent, whether it's with Alex or with other people on the front end, because
Mhm.
it actually, I think, shortens the overall time you spend on more critical decisions, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are subscribed to Alex and Sophie, I don't know if you can pull a link real quick to a trial page of Alex in case anyone's interested in that. This would be a great prompt. You can actually not only ask Alex to give you perspective, but you can tell Alex what perspective you want. Alex, you're the client in this case, or Alex, you're the coworker, or you're my supervisor in this case. Give that perspective. And it does offer, I mean, in this age and the ability that Alex has to give you those perspectives quickly affords you even more margin to work and operate in this gray area. Uh, what would you say? So, thanks, Sophie. So, what would you say? So, I'm going to go to some of the specific kind of pre-submitted questions that came in. One in particular, I was very interested in. Hypothetically, if I was, married to a attorney and had these intense moments of fellowship, when you're passionate about something, are there any practical strategies so that you can stay calm and operate in the gray, right? We've heard the count to five, before you react, and there's some of that there, but anything come to mind of how we can best help others open up to think a little bit differently or outside of the black and white?
Yeah, I mean, this is a simple answer to this, which I apologize for, but I mean, I think train yourself to never answer a definitive question at the beginning and then start asking questions. Like
Mm,
if somebody says, "Do you think we should do this?" Do not say yes or no.
mm,
Say, "Well, what needs to be true for this to happen?" I mean, there's different questions that you can kind of program yourself to and practice that so they become more of a habit for you to ask when those things present themselves. Because yeah, it's like again, we have this whether we're passionate or we think that we need to be fast and decisive, for all these reasons, we tend to say yes. It's like
yep.
why you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. And so I think training yourself to not and some people hate this, but to train yourself to answer a question with a question versus answering a question directly, I think is really important to not necessarily, you know, making a bad call because of your bias or because you're passionate about something. I mean, there's nobody more passionate on certain topics than I am. And candidly, I can be, if I'm too, if I'm too into it, I can actually do things that are relationally damaging, which is completely counter to who I am, you know?
Hmm.
And so I have to really push myself to say, okay, what's the question you need to answer right now? How do you be curious versus decisive? Because I think that, again, curiosity is going to be more relational, more powerful, and get to a better outcome than speed.
Yeah. Yeah, don't let somebody else frame the problem for you until you're ready to agree with what the actual problem is. And the ability to answer a question with a question sometimes allows you to get to that. That's really good. All right, another one that has to do with really what seems to be some complex organizational dynamics. This person said, as a liaison between two functions that may have somewhat different priorities. How can they be helped to find common ground when their means of seeking objectives don't align and create friction?
Yeah, I really I saw that question and I was like, I really want to know more about this.
Yeah.
But this is where getting clarity up front on maybe what the goal, like ultimately what's the goal we're trying to achieve,
Mhm.
getting clarity on what the values are that are most important in this, and getting clarity on, we talk a lot about communicating strategy. I think when you have clarity on what your organizational strategy is, how you get there, there's lots of paths to get there. But if it's like, I know the destination I'm trying to get to, and I know behaviorally how we should show up as we're doing that, if you can make sure that there's alignment to that at the beginning, I think it's very powerful. Now, that sounds, that could sound Pollyannish, and I realize there are organizational politics at play. But I think the other piece is being clear on who really is the decision maker. I think sometimes we don't know. And so it's like we may have different priorities, and if they come in conflict with each other, who essentially is the one who's going to make the decision? And being clear on that, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, to that individual who asked that question, I'm actually going to drop in the chat box. This is actually the field note that we had a webinar on very recently. So finding common ground versus a common goal, which might be a great field note to go look back at. And then that webinar that we just had recently, I believe it was with Diana, was really, really good too. With that said, Sophie, if you would drop where people can find the recordings of previous sessions of this, that would be great. All right, last question, Carolyn, if came in ahead of time, I think it'd be great. How do you train staff to delay decisions rather than checking a box? How do I encourage staff to take time to think things over rather than just checking it off?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. One, there's this concept that some people call ladder of autonomy, some people call ladder of confidence, that is it helpful for leaders to share with their teams as a way of saying, here's the decisions that I want you to get my input on. So there's essentially, without getting too deep into it, there's four levels of autonomy that you can give your team. One is if they have a situation, they come to you and say, what do I do? Which I encourage you to never have your team at that level because, you need people to think for themselves. But level one is, what do I do? Level two is they come to you and say, here's what I think. What do you think? Level three is, here's what I'm going to do. Stop me if I'm wrong. And then level four is, here's what I did. Your ability to create clarity for what things, like where your team should be operating on different topics, is really important. And being able to say, like, here's the things that I need you to come to me and get my point of view on versus just try and get it done. So some leaders will create categories and say, one leader in particular said, if it's political, if it's going to set a precedent, or it's over a certain budget dollar amount, you need to come to me and we need to talk this through. And I need you to appreciate the context that I have, and have us talk it through together. Most everything else, either you should be at a 3 or a 4. So I think that's a helpful framework for leaders and for team members. So to say, like, okay, I've got the autonomy to go forth on these things, but these things I should really, get the wisdom of my leader and of some other folks, because I just haven't had that context yet. I think, and then there's lots of other things that you can help to kind of inculcate with your team. I think the ability to think through second order consequences, like that is just something that anybody who is operating in the world should like really cultivate as a skill. Like I just can't underscore how important that is. And then the other piece is, I think, helping people think things through in advance. Like the more you can kind of, it goes back to the old like crisis scenario planning. The reason people have crisis plans is so that they don't have to make decisions in the moment. They've thought things through ahead of time and said, okay, this is going to be a little chaotic. I don't want to have to make this decision in the moment. So let's think it through ahead of time. And then if we have to adjust in the moment, we can. The more you can do that kind of scenario planning with your team, you help to develop them in a way where they don't necessarily have to have had that experience in order to make a quality decision. And so I think just create, do reserve time in your meetings to do scenario planning and do, kind of think some of those things through ahead of time, because I think that helps people to just, start to train themselves as well.
Love that. So with that said, we know we don't always get to all the questions on these. So Sophie's going to drop in the chat box another link if you want to schedule just a quick 10 minutes to get some quick advice, coaching from one of our coaches. You can book that time, give us some quick context to your particular situation or circumstance. We can get after that for sure. And then as we have our fall series of on-location events coming up. So we're going to be in Charlotte and Boston and Vegas and potentially out in San Francisco towards the end of this year. So I'm going to have Sophie drop those events, where you can find those events, in the chat box as well. We'd love as we're out in and around the nation to see you in person too. So I have, by no coincidence, I actually just looked down and my wife was kind enough to give me a mug that says, "If at first you don't succeed, try doing what your attorney told you to do the first time," which is just, I don't know if it's coincidence or what that this was the mug I was drinking out of today.
I think we
But-
need I think we need a version of that that says your coach or your
yes,
advisor, and then we could hand those out at the firm because we have to many days avoid and resist ourselves from saying, "I told you so." You can't say it, but there are times you really want to. So I think your wife is in the same boat, Wes.
that's exactly right. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much. Any last advice, wisdom for anyone on this particular topic, anyone who might be listening to the recording today?
Oh my gosh. I've said it a couple of times, but I think the more the clarity you can have on your values and what's important to you, I think that really helps with the decision making and also in times of speed, right? Like when you do need to be fast, how do you make sure you make a decision that's in line with what's important to you? Spend some time thinking about that. I think it comes in to be important every day for different reasons, and this is another one of them. So values-driven leaders are often the most admired leaders, and I encourage you to think about how you can be a values-driven leader too.
It's awesome. Carolyn, you're wonderful as always. Appreciate you, all you do for our firm and our clients. Thanks to everyone who joined live today and all the great comments in chat. We will leave that chat open for the next 5 minutes or so you can grab at any of those links that you want to. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
See you
Bye.
soon.